Most people think the Quran came down like a book. Chapter 1, verse 1, then verse 2, in perfect order. They're completely wrong. And this misunderstanding has allowed one of history's biggest lies about Islam to survive for centuries. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to spot that lie. When people imagine divine revelation, they picture someone sitting down, receiving a complete book from beginning to end. Maybe it took weeks, maybe months. But the Quran, it took 23 years. And it didn't come in order. Here's how it actually worked. Muhammad is going about his daily life in 7th century Arabia. Suddenly, a specific situation comes up. Someone asks a legal question about inheritance. There's a dispute between community members. A military conflict arises. His wife gets falsely accused. And then, in response to that specific situation, he receives what he claims is revelation. Sometimes one verse, sometimes several, sometimes a whole chapter. But here's the key. These verses are responding to immediate, real-world situations. Let's say you're reading chapter 2 of the Quran today. You see verses 1 through 286. You might assume they came down in that order, right? Wrong. Verse 1 through 5 might have been revealed in year 2 of Muhammad's mission. Verses 67 through 89 could have come down in year 8. Verses 200 through 210 might have been revealed in year 15. The middle section could be from year 3, and the ending from year 20. Imagine trying to write a novel where you receive random paragraphs over 2 decades, in response to events you can't predict, and you don't know where they go in the final book. That's what we're dealing with. Let's look at actual examples. The verses about the veil came down after a specific incident involving Muhammad's wife. Inheritance laws revealed after people asked specific legal questions. Battle regulations came during actual military campaigns. The chapter of light revealed during a scandal involving false accusations. Each time the revelation addressed the immediate situation. Muhammad would then tell his companions, "Put this verse in the chapter that mentions such and such." But the final arrangement, that wasn't complete until after his death.
So how did they keep track of all this scattered revelation? Memory first. In oral cultures, people had incredible memorization skills. Muhammad's companions would memorize new verses immediately.
But they also wrote verses on whatever was available. Animal bones, leather, flat stones, pieces of wood. And Muhammad gave instructions. This verse goes in the chapter about the cow, or put this after the verse about prayer. But remember, the final, complete arrangement wasn't finished until years after Muhammad died, when the caliphs compiled everything. Now that you understand this process, let me show you why it matters. There's a famous story called the Satanic Verses. It's meant to discredit Islam and the Quran. The claim goes like this. Satan tricked Muhammad into receiving fake verses that praised pagan goddesses alongside Allah. These verses were supposedly part of Surah An-Najm, chapter 53. According to this story, Muhammad received verses that said the 3 main Arabian goddesses could intercede with Allah. This would have been polytheism, the exact opposite of Islam's core message of pure monotheism. The story claims he later realized these were satanic deceptions and they were removed. But here's where your new knowledge destroys this lie. Surah An-Najm was revealed early in Muhammad's mission, around year 5 or 6 in Mecca. And here's the killer fact. That chapter received no additional verses for approximately 8 years after it was initially revealed. Think about what this means. If Satan really tricked Muhammad peace and blessing onto him into including polytheistic verses, any divine correction would need to come as additional verses to that same chapter. But there were no additional verses for 8 years, so the correction would have had to wait nearly a decade. But it gets worse. If this story were true, it means for 8 years, Muslims would have been actively reciting and praising pagan goddesses as part of their worship. The entire early Muslim community would have been practicing polytheism while believing it was monotheism. Prophet Muhammad's core message, pure monotheism, would have been fundamentally compromised for nearly a decade. You can't be a monotheistic prophet while your followers are worshipping multiple deities for 8 years. This is why Islamic scholar Dr. Ali Attai says that if the satanic verses story were true, it would forfeit the claim of prophethood by default. Because if Satan could successfully deceive a prophet about divine revelation, the most fundamental aspect of prophethood, this would be an immediate, catastrophic crisis requiring immediate divine intervention. Not 8 years later, not in a different chapter. Immediately, in that same revelatory context. The 8-year gap proves this incident never happened, because no divine revelation system could permit such a fundamental error to persist. No true monotheistic prophet could allow polytheistic worship to continue for years. The practical reality of Muslims reciting pagan praise for nearly a decade makes the story impossible. This story only survives because people don't understand how the Quran was actually revealed. Now you do. And now you can spot the lie. Understanding the revelation process, the scattered verses, the responsive nature, the compilation timeline, this knowledge is your shield against historical fabrications. But now that you understand how verses came scattered over 23 years, let me show you something that will blow your mind. Scholars have discovered something hidden in the Quran's structure, something that shouldn't be possible given how it was revealed. It's called ring composition, or chiasmus. It's an ancient literary technique where ideas are arranged in a specific order, then repeated in reverse, creating a symmetrical pattern around a central theme. The structure looks like this: A, B, C, D, C, B, A, where D is the focal point and everything mirrors around it. Here's a famous example from President Kennedy. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. See how it mirrors? Ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. Ask. It's a rhetorical technique that creates emphasis and memorability. Now here's where it gets interesting. Scholars have found these ring structures throughout the Quran, not just in individual verses but across entire chapters. Themes introduced at the beginning circle back and find resolution at the end, with the main message at the center. This isn't fringe theory. Serious academics like Michael Kuipers have published entire books on this. The Composition of the Quran, Rhetorical Analysis. Raymond Farron wrote Structure and Quranic Interpretation, a study of symmetry and coherence. Nevin Rada completed a PhD thesis on textual coherence in the Quran. These are legitimate scholars doing rigorous textual analysis. Take Surah Yusuf, chapter 12. Academic papers argue it demonstrates ring composition more intricately than previously acknowledged. Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter. Surah Al-Kahf, the cave. Multiple chapters show these symmetrical patterns. But remember what you learned in part 1. These chapters contain verses revealed years apart in response to completely unrelated situations. So you have a verse from year 5 that perfectly mirrors a verse from year 15, creating a symmetrical structure that only becomes apparent when the chapter is complete. Imagine composing a symphony by writing random measures over 20 years in response to daily events, then having someone else arrange them years after you die, and discovering they form perfect musical structures. That's the level of complexity we're talking about. Now, Arabic is a unique language. Words carry multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. Root systems create connections across different words. This means scholars analyzing ring structures have some interpretive flexibility. They might emphasize phonetic patterns over grammatical ones, or metaphorical meanings over literal ones. And that's legitimate. The richness of Arabic makes this kind of analysis possible. Not everyone is convinced. Some academic reviewers have called certain ring structure claims extremely tenuous. They argue that scholars might be reading patterns into the text rather than finding genuine structures. This criticism is important. It keeps the research honest. Here's the problem. Scholars have only analyzed select chapters in detail. Surah Yusuf, Al-Fatiha, a handful of others. But the Quran has 114 chapters, 6,236 verses total. We don't have a comprehensive, systematic study of ring structures across the entire Quran. What we need is a concerted, organized effort. An organization with advanced Arabic linguistic expertise, computational resources for pattern analysis, the ability to examine every single verse systematically, independent verification by multiple scholars using consistent methodology, statistical analysis to distinguish real patterns from coincidental ones. And this can't just be Muslim scholars. We need secular academics, skeptics, critics, people who would love to debunk these claims if they're false. Because that's how good science works. Multiple perspectives, transparent methodology, peer review. Let the evidence speak for itself. If even a few genuine ring structures exist in chapters with verses revealed years apart, that's remarkable. It suggests a level of planning and coherence that shouldn't be possible given the revelation process. But we need rigorous methodology to separate signal from noise. We can't cherry-pick examples. We need comprehensive analysis. So here's my challenge. To Muslim organizations with resources, fund this research. To academic institutions, make this a priority. To individual scholars, collaborate across religious and secular lines. To viewers, share this video. Let's get the conversation started. Let's find out, is this pattern throughout the Quran? Have we missed a pattern occurring in the Quran for 1,400 plus years? The Holy Quran, the Final Testament. It's not going anywhere. Let's finally give it the comprehensive structural analysis it deserves. You now know two things most people don't. First, how the Quran was actually revealed, and why that knowledge destroys false narratives like the Satanic Verses story. Second, that there's a genuine mathematical and literary mystery hidden in the Quran's structure that needs serious investigation. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, atheist, or anything else, truth should matter to you. And truth requires honest investigation. So let's investigate. Let's find out what's really there. The data is waiting. We just need the will to examine it properly. If this video changed how you see Islamic history, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into religious texts and historical claims. And drop a comment. Do you think ring structures are real, or are scholars reading patterns that aren't there? Let's discuss. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and never accept easy answers to complex questions.